Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, a show designed to help dads disciple their children. It's for fathers who don't just want to raise children, but lead them in a way that honors Jesus. It's a place where you might discover, for the first time, that you're not a father on accident, which makes you, of course, a father on purpose. To help guide us on that journey are our hosts, Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Kent's a husband, a dad, an author, and the co-founder of Manhood Journey. Lawson's a husband, a father, a military veteran, and business executive. He believes that if he just keeps trying, one day he'll get Kent to have a coherent train of thought. Good luck with that. As you listen, we hope you'll find biblical ideas, practical tips, and even have some fun along the journey. Every single dad is a disciple maker. The only question? Discipling them. How? To where? Let's discover that together. As we dive in, remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose. Welcome aboard.
Hey, Dad. Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast. And we have, as you probably noticed, when you clicked play on today's episode, it had a number in front of it. And the number was 200.
Nice.
Lawson, can you believe we've actually done 200 episodes?
I know. That's pretty great, man. What a work that's being done. I love it. So good to be a part of this.
Super pumped. 200th episode. So we're running a special promotion, and that is Lawson's going to give you $200. No, I'm just kidding. That's not actually what's happening. But
I wondered where you were going with that.
We're super grateful for the thousands of dads who have dialed in to the Father on Purpose show for the last couple of years. You know, you can do the math. We publish a show every week. And when you get to 200, you're right up against the 4-year mark. So in the next month or two, we will have recorded 4 years of episodes, which is really hard to believe. Like, I can imagine 200 making more sense than 4 whole years of having been doing this. And man, I've had guys email me, text me, call me, and say that the podcast really matters to them. And so to you, Dad, hats off. Thanks for sticking around, because if you weren't still around, we probably would have stopped 100 episodes ago. So,
or we would just be talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, maybe that's what we're doing anyway.
Hey, I don't mind. I don't mind that a bit, man. This has been a blessing in my life these years. That is for sure. And just being a part of what I feel like is a God moving among the community of dads seeking His wisdom and guidance. This is such a great, man. It's just been great for me.
Hey, and on a personal note, at the same time we're recording this episode, I'm about 3 weeks from almost exactly 3.5 weeks from my 30th wedding anniversary.
Big number.
Quick shout out to my amazing wife, April, who has put up with me for 26 years longer than you have, Lawson. So that's pretty doggone amazing. Thank you, April. I was listening not long ago. Today's episode is going to be, since it's our 200th, decided to cover kind of a key topic, one that's like, if we could only cover 10 topics over and over and over again, this would be in the running for being one of the 10 topics that I think is very, very relevant to dads. And it's like a razor's edge kind of topic. In other words, to get it right, you kind of got to be really balanced on a couple ends. Recently, I was listening to a guy who's giving fatherhood advice, and it doesn't really matter who or where, but the bottom line was, he had solid advice. Like, it was not bad guidance. The only takeaway that was a bit concerning was that he was the expert. So the way that he positioned himself was, listen to me because I am a fatherhood expert. And you and I, back 4 years ago, when we talked about doing this show, that was one of the things we wanted to try and avoid. Not that we have nothing to offer. It's not that you and I have no advice or no ideas, or like nothing's ever worked in 25 years of fatherhood for each of us. However, I don't want to be the ultimate source.
Right.
I don't want to be the ultimate source for a guy listening to this show, and I don't want to be the ultimate source for my own children. or for my lovely wife. I want to point to the source. So one relatively simple metaphor that we could use on today's show would be, I'm like a conduit, or I'm like the hose that the water flows through. I'm not the water. I'm not the reservoir.
Right.
I'm not the
what's
I'm not
in the
river.
reservoir.
Right. Instead, I'm meant to be this kind of middleman between the source and the recipient. And that is that I am to take God's wisdom and inject it into my family. And when they go, wow, Dad, that's really great. Then I go, I know, right? Because God said so. Not because kids said so, right?
Right.
Like that's, if I get it right, it's only because I'm agreeing with the God of the universe. It's not because I invented it. And I think it's a very slippery slope for us as dads. We want to be, authority figures. We want to be relevant. We want to be informed. We want to be wise and rational and give good advice. But at the same time, we want to remind our kids or inform our kids that we're like just ladling it out of the, the river or the pot. We're not the one who invented all this. And so, Lawson, get us started on this idea of how maybe you've done this with your daughters, or how you've done this with other dads, or seen it play out in your life.
I went pretty hard on this analogy of water flow, because you know what business I'm in? Water flow.
This show brought to you by
by Core and Main.
Hey, by the way, I forgot to mention this show actually is brought to you by Range Leather. Go to rangeleather.com.
Oh yeah, go for it. Right on.
MJ15 is the coupon code to get 15% off your order. This show is brought to you by rangeleather.com. Go to rangeleather.com, snag some amazing products, and use the code MJ15 to get 15% off your next order. Back to the show.
Back to the show. And check it out. This Range Leather notebook goes everywhere with me. Nice. And when I'm in meetings, man, it's rare that I don't get a compliment on this thing. It holds my note-taking ability in here. It's everything.
I did forget that you are a legit water flow expert.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that there's a lot of people in my company who are experts. And so this thought, we talked about, is it like, we reflect God, or redirect, I guess, rather. But the water thing does make sense. In the case of water supply, there's like the pipes are involved, the kind of the vessel of moving water. We got water mains like that come off the street that go into the building that hit that hit the water line, and then branch lines come off of that to further distribute the water. And it made me think of like John 15:5 says, I am the vine, you are the branches, so we're part of the network maybe for distributing the water. But then, in an actual system, you've got components, you've got valves that control the direction and the speed. You got pumps that help, with propulsion. There's a lot that goes into the movement of water. And if we're thinking about us dads as like a network or a supply network of the water, go all the way up to the source. The source can be like a man-made body, like a reservoir or a spring or a river or a lake. But even what's holding it, even what's storing it is only a part of the means by which God gets himself out there, gets himself among our children. John 7:38 reads, whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. And so in that case, I kind of associate a reservoir as our heart. Us dads, what's in our heart will flow out. And that is, as God has designed it, that flows into our families and into conversations, into Bible studies with our kids, and then what we as a dad can do is point to the source. We can identify the source. It's the source would be like, hey, let's go out here and look at that reservoir, look at that pond. That is a source of water. But the actual water itself is what we're talking about. The water is substance. The water is sustenance. It's our need. The water fulfills
Yes.
And in our case, the water is life. And in the case of God, he is our life. He is our living water. And so everything else is like part of the storage and distribution process, and we get to be a part of that. But the actual water is what we're talking about.
Jesus is talking to this lady in John 4, and he's at this well, and the topic comes up about the water in the well. And he says, whoever drinks that water is going to be thirsty again. Then he pivots and says, but whoever, in John 4:14, whoever drinks the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water I shall give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So I have this long list of questions I'm going to ask God when I get to heaven. And I recognize that, there's a pretty good chance I won't care about the answers to 95% of them once I'm in heaven. Like I'm holding on to this list, but it's probably going to just, die with me. And when I'm in heaven, I won't care anymore. But if I do care, I'm going to ask God to explain things like math. I'm going to ask him to explain things like gravitational pull and the planets, biology. One of the things I'm going to ask him to explain is the connection between water and like the spirit and life. Like there is this, we can understand it at a conscious level, right? Obviously, if you're stranded in the desert and you go, more than a few weeks without water, you're going to die. Like we know it's a life-giving liquid that we can't live without. We also know from, a lot of science experiments over the last several hundred years, you can go longer without food than water. Hydration is critical to your health. So there's an obvious health, I'll say benefit, but it's like a base level.
Yeah.
No water.
And like
no
our
life,
bodies are
right?
made of whatever it's a super high
Tons of
percentage.
water,
Right.
Super high percentage of water. But there's also something that I heard the guy say one time, we've talked about this a lot on the show. It's not remarkable that Jesus could use a fig tree to make an illustration while he's walking down the road.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that when he was in heaven, he goes, hey, let's make a fig tree. So then one day when I'm down on earth, I can use it as an explanation. So like the fact that fig trees existed, or that biology or photosynthesis or hydration exists at all, the fact that hydration exists at all is a God-made biological reality. And for me, that's fascinating. And I only can understand it like probably 1/1,000,000%. But when Jesus says the water he will give us will inside of us become a spring of water welling up to eternal life, he's not talking about the biological response of dehydration. He's talking about the spiritual response of relying fully on his word. And that's what I'm hoping a dad is hearing as he's listening to today's show. Dad, you did not invent H2O. You are not the reservoir of the H2O. You didn't invent its impact on the human body or the system. You didn't invent the spiritual impact of Jesus, the water, the word of life being given to us. You didn't invent any of that. Cool. It takes a lot of the pressure off as a father if we know that. All you got to do is, to Lawson's point, be able to point to it. Be one of the pipes that moves that water from the source to your children. And then as you do, eventually you're like, hey, kids, come here. Let me show you where I get all this. And then you can you can dip your own ladle into the river, and you don't need me to be bringing you the water all the time. And so that's the idea, right? I want to work myself out of the job of having to be the water distribution guy.
Yeah, I was talking to Abigail this morning about this particular topic, this episode. She's home for a week. Thank goodness. We're loving having her here home from New York City. And she and I were just sitting out on the back porch, and I told her I was getting ready to come in and, get going on this. And she asked what the topic was. I told her, and she was like, ooh, I bet that could feel like a relief too,
nice.
like take the pressure off of yourself. And I was like, yeah, it really is that. It is a reliance not on ourselves,
right,
but on him. And it takes some of the weight off of our shoulders that he doesn't want us to try and even start to carry. Sometimes we do, we grab that pack and throw it on. But he is there to carry it for and with us.
I thought Abigail was going to say, finally, Dad, someone has told you you're not the source of everything. Because, Abigail, you're welcome. I've been telling your dad that for 4 years, and I think it's finally landed.
Well, this morning was a revelation for her. She got to see it live. What you were saying, like like we talked about, like pointing to the source or pointing to where it is located. The reservoir is not the point. What's in the reservoir is the point. And like John 7:38 says, whoever believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. If my heart is as part of the distribution center, like a reservoir or it must hold some of it because it flows out, is what the scripture says. It flows out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Step one, believe, is what it says. I think there are things that we can also do to affirm and reinforce and build a relationship, like spending time in the Word and prayer and all that. But we are prohibiting the flow when we aren't allowing it to flow out of us. If we are hoarding it, and that's maybe early on when I was kind of becoming a Christian, I know it's an immediate, but I was learning, and I was kind of growing in my faith and understanding everything that I, at the time could take in. And you're compelled to share that water. It's overflowing. And so having that buy-in in our mind, so that we are not like thinking, I got to go find this water. Like, where am I going to go search? And it's going to be hard, and I'm in the desert, and it's going to be like, I got to know what I'm doing to even find it. No, it's in you. It's, what we can do is share it.
Yeah.
And does it take effort? Yeah. It takes some effort. You can't just be a knot on a log and not share anything with your children. That is the point. He wants it to be so overflowing that it just naturally cascades throughout our homes and in our kids' lives. And like with you and April coming up on 30 years, that water's been flowing throughout your marriage. And sometimes you're just kind of floating in it and enjoying, and sometimes it's waves crashing, and just not in a bad way, but just like splashing all over you, and you just begging for it. You need it in your family's life. And he provides it, but he provides it through our heart.
Yeah.
Is my point.
Well, and to your point, man, like if you think about, if I've got to store up water, let's say you and I are going on a 100-mile journey across the desert, and I got to store up enough water so we live to the end of the journey, I'm going to need bigger and bigger tanks, right? We're going to have to drag something behind a camel, or we're going to have bigger and bigger tanks, because we got to carry all the weight of that water over the distance and, retain it. However, kind of the opposite is true in terms of this spiritual, life-giving water. As I press it into my heart, and as I press it into my soul, it wells up. Like, so I don't need to become, 800 pounds bigger as a person to retain more godly wisdom, to have more water to pour out on my family. I don't need a bigger container.
Right.
I really just need to shove it deeper into my heart. It's almost like tapping oil in that sense, right? The deeper I go, I'm going to tap it, and it's going to spring up like a geyser. I don't have to necessarily keep tapping, if that makes sense. So like for the dad who's thinking that, he's going to have like care. I remember there was a lady who's brilliant lady named Doris, who used to teach Bible studies at our church. And this was all kind of pre-digital. And when she would come into church, ready for her Bible study, she had one of those carts on wheels, like it's like a suitcase, but it's more like a file folder box with wheels attached to it. And she would roll in with booklets, study guides, Bibles, printed out materials to hand all of us. Now you go to blueletterbible.com and you got 100 times what Doris had in her little cart. So you can get it all online these days. And there's a parallel understanding there, I think. When we look at, physical water, you got to have bigger and bigger things to store it up in. where spiritual, life-giving water that Jesus is talking about, you got to have more of an open heart, and it's got to be pressed down deeper into your heart. And I'd like to share a couple scriptures, Lawson. Let me get you to react to these. I'm gonna go kind of rapid fire through a few. You pick at whatever you want to aim at. Proverbs 2:6 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom; from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." Proverbs 10:11 says, "The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence." 2 Corinthians 4:7 and 5:20 kind of are connected, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. That's 2 Corinthians 4:7. And 2 Corinthians 5:20 says, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God." So some of these ideas, from God's mouth comes wisdom. From our mouth should come a fountain of life. We're carrying around treasure in jars of clay to show that we are not the answer, God is, and that we are ambassadors for Christ. God makes his appeal to humanity through us. Where does your head go on some of those?
I think about what Abigail said. That gives me peace and the confidence to rely. Every one of them was basically saying, it's not from you, it's from God. Right. It's not on you. It's depend on him. You don't have to come up with the wisdom. From his mouth come that knowledge and understanding. Yeah. You're not the fountain of life. He is. And you store in jars of clay the treasure that is the power that belongs to God. And then John 3:27, I'll add, says, John answered, "A person cannot receive one thing unless it is given him from heaven." So all this, we don't need to have a, what is that kind of machine that you can get water from, oh gosh, it's I want to say osmosis
faucet?
Or something. Huh? What is that machine?
It's a cup.
Sink?
Faucet. Bucket. Barrel.
Let me not overthink this. A faucet, a tap. No, but I'm saying we don't create the water. Yeah. It exists because he made it. The wisdom is coming from him. The righteousness that is a fountain of life comes from him. And the treasure that we can hold in our temporary jars of clay. It doesn't say jars that will outlast the universe. Clay is a finite piece of gear. It's going to age and crack and whatever. So he's got that ability to continually refresh. And it says real clearly, we can't receive one thing unless it's given from heaven. So that's what I'm talking about, kind of the relief.
It's like when we talk about people in the past and we call them inventors, whoever that might be, Marie Curie, the Wright brothers, whoever.
Yeah, he invented electricity.
Yeah, really not so much, right? It's like, it's like, and no disrespect to any brilliant minds.
That's a good thought, right?
We don't ever invent anything. We assemble. Or we might discover, we may discover that an apple
it existed.
Falls at, 9.2 feet per second squared, or we may discover the way this world works, but we're not inventing, manned air flight. We didn't invent it. We discovered how to make it work. I'm gonna
go turn the faucet on and be like, look, I just created water.
If you take 2 hydrogen molecules with 1 oxygen,
all you got to do is turn this faucet.
All you got to do is, in John 3, you referenced it. That's John the Baptist. He's being pressed a little bit by some people around him about what he's doing in baptism. And then after he says, a person can't receive even one thing. I heard a guy say one time, you think you're really powerful, go invent a blade of grass. But don't start with any of the chemicals you have on earth, because God already invented all those. So you got to start with your own chemicals. And so it's just, it's a fun way to look at just the fact that humans are discovering and reconnecting and using our God-given brains to find cool ways to use the things he gave us. But there's a sense in which we invent nothing. And John said a few verses later, he said, Jesus must increase and I must decrease. And there's really a whole fatherhood lesson in just like those 7 words. He must increase, but I must decrease. Over time, I want my kids less and less dependent upon me and more dependent upon Jesus, right? If you've ever tried to like trade places with somebody on two different sides of a seesaw, you kind of get to the middle at the same time, and then you kind of inch over and you both go at the same distance and try to balance your weight. There's a little bit to that, right? Where what I'm trying to do is get out of the way and let my kids get more and more connected straight to God.
Yeah.
So that then, I can step off the other end in terms of them connecting to God, and then just be their friend as they are adults, right? I want to be my older kids' mentor, friend, maybe mentor, maybe not, but I want to be their friend, and I want to be their, brother in Christ. But at some point, I want to decrease, and I want Jesus to increase in their heart. Psalm 115 says it this way: "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give the glory for the sake of your steadfast love and your faithfulness." If I can transfer, my kids, it's a little bit like that plug adapter. I hate to use so many metaphors, but they start by knowing God by plugging into my plug adapter. And then eventually I want to pull that out of the wall and plug them straight into the source, so that then they can learn directly from God throughout the rest of their adult life. Because let's face it, they're going to be adults unless Jesus comes back or they die early. They're going to be adults way longer than they were kids. And so I'm trying to arm them for that. And I'm not the magic. Jesus and the Holy Spirit are.
What do you think about this? You talked about 2 Corinthians 5:20. It says, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. And we implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God." And I underlined in my notes, ambassadors.
Yeah.
It says we are ambassadors for Christ. And I thought about that word. So us dads are like, I don't know, would you say we're like representatives or messengers? What does an ambassador do? What an embassy in another country is a representative of the American government. The ambassador themselves, they take messages, they receive information, they help interpret.
That's right.
But they're just there on behalf of someone. They're, like would you call, I think stand-in is maybe too benign a word or too generic a word, but what do you think? Pick that apart.
Well, so what's interesting is you're reminding me of the times when I've only been in an American embassy a couple times. Both cases, it had to do with me adopting, and it was the American embassy in the country of Ethiopia. And what's interesting about, just kind of pull that thread for a bit. One thing is, and it's not that I'm calling the Ethiopians enemies, but let's call it foreign territory. If you're an ambassador, kind of by definition, you're not in your home country. You're not on your home turf.
Okay.
You're on somebody else's turf.
Yep.
And so I love this idea of an ambassador, because as Christians, we're on the earth's turf, both literally and metaphorically.
There you go. Yep.
And what we're representing is a heavenly kingdom. So we're representing this heavenly kingdom that is, kind of here, kind of not, right? Because Satan's got a lot to say about how this earth works, and there's still sin and death and trouble and pain and suffering on this earth. All that still exists. So it's kind of like God's dropped his believers into this foreign territory called planet Earth. So right now, we can be an ambassador for this kingdom that is coming, right? Is coming. And so for me, I just immediately go back to the doorway and the gateway that we saw the American embassy in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We saw that as this portal into the world we needed to go back to, right? And their approval, like their stamp, was basically required for us to get done what we needed to get done, right? You go over there, you get the Ethiopian government's approval for the adoption, kind of check the box, and that's not a simple box to check. But once you get that done, then you take all that basically to the American embassy in a big envelope, and then they've got to agree. And then once you've got the exiting government's approval and you've got the quote unquote entering government's approval, we get the Americans' approval, then we can get on our flight and know that when we get back to America, we won't get hassled, right? I remember one of our flights landed in Newark, New Jersey. And there's literally like a line on the carpet that when you step across it, you are now your adopted son becomes a citizen of the United States. Like there's like a demarcation line, and they tell you, don't open that envelope that the American Embassy gave you. Like when I walked up to the people at Newark, New Jersey, I was supposed to have a sealed envelope from the American Embassy in Addis Ababa. So I put it in my backpack. You don't touch it. You don't open it. You hand it to the American representative. And if it's open or tampered with, you're in trouble. If it's not, they crack it open. They say, welcome to America. And that's the first moment when your adopted child becomes an American citizen. So,
no way.
Yeah, very symbolic, very ceremonial. And you're just reminding me of that. So when we see this phrase of being an ambassador for God, I just think of like, dozens of thoughts, but it's on the same exact topic. I'm not the government. I'm not the president. You're not the president of the United States. You're not all the people of the United States. You're just in this foreign country representing the other country. And then you decide, how to administer the American stuff you got to administer. You got to administer that on foreign soil and play by these rules. And so very, very interesting dynamics in how ambassadorship relates to our walk with Christ for sure.
Very nice, man. That is a really cool way to tie that in, and the fact that you were adopted, you were official. Like as soon as that happens, I was wondering how in 2 Corinthians 4:7, we talked about this, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. I had underlined belongs and not, because the power, I don't even know that it's like, I don't think that it is God letting us borrow his power. It's his power. It belongs to him. It is his power on display. Now we may witness it. It may be something that is kind of deployed through us, in our life, but we back to this, the water and the distribution of water, same with his surpassing power belongs to him, might flow through and into our families through us, but it does not belong to us. It's very clear in there. It says surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. It didn't just put a period at the end of that surpassing power belongs to God. It makes sure it's not left up to further interpretation. And I like
to
that.
us. Let me be real clear.
Right. Let me double down on this. And I appreciate that. I like that. I'm grateful that it spells it out so clearly, because my temptation is to be in charge, to be the dad, to be the provider and approver of wisdom and what's happening within my family, and to solve things and to reconcile arguments and all this that God repeatedly says, don't rely on yourself. You've got my Holy Spirit, my water, my power. Funnel it, channel it, be a conduit, get out of the way.
As you think about this, Dad, let me close with this specific Bible verse. It's in 1 Peter 4, and around this section of 1 Peter 4, Peter's talking about the gifts that God has given us. Gifts of teaching, gifts of hospitality, leadership, mercy, etc. And right before this, he says, whatever gift you've been given, use it to serve the body, to serve people. And then we get this verse in verse 11, 1 Peter 4:11. It says this: whoever speaks as one who speaks the oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God provides or supplies. In order that, and I love that phrase in the Bible, right? So that, in order that, because it tells us, hey, here's what God does, and then here's the reason he does it. So when you're exercising your gifts, whatever those gifts are, exercise them by the strength that God provides, in order that in everything, God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. I recall years and years ago, I went to an event where someone was going to play the violin. And the guy who was playing the violin was so skilled, like literally one of the best in the world at his craft. And he was so skilled that he did one song where he said, hey, close your eyes and imagine what instrument I'm playing. No kidding. Close your eyes. You listen to him play this violin, and it sounded like Scottish bagpipes. Like, I'm not kidding. You would not have known the difference. And you close your eyes and listen and go, what, did he roll out like 9 guys in kilts up on stage? This is crazy. And you open your eyes and there he is with a violin. He could make the violin do things that were like otherworldly. And that is what I think is fascinating. So that in that, do you look at that guy and go, man, nice job. You've got a lot of skill. You got a lot of skill at your craft. Sure, obviously. He'd had thousands and thousands of hours in mastering the craft of playing the violin. However, did he invent music? Did he invent wood or trees to go make that violin?
Yeah, audio waves.
Did he invent this, the cochlear machine I have in my head that allows me to hear sound or transfer it from my eardrum to my brain? Did he invent any of that?
Right.
No, he needs that system. I mean, down to like the chemicals used to create the strings on the violin. Like none of that could he have invented from scratch. What he figured out how to do was play the instrument God gave him and use the talent God put in his mind and his heart. But in the end, and he's a believer, in the end, to God be the glory for the whole panoply of things, the whole cadre of things that are required to have made that night possible, the vast majority of which that guy could never, ever have created. And so, Dad, as you're leading your family, recognize God's put certain gifts in your heart and certain skills and abilities, past experiences, you name it. He's given you resources. As you use them, don't take the credit. And don't take the pressure of having to feel like you've got to invent everything. We are like the violinist, where we're standing on the shoulders of whoever harvested that wood, whoever made those strings, whoever built that stage he was standing on, whoever invented the microphone system it was broadcast through. There were probably 1,000 people who contributed somehow to that night, either that night or in the 100 or 200 years prior. So when we become a dad, you don't have to be the source. You just got to be a reliable conduit and point your kids back to the source. Thanks for spending some time with us on episode number 200.
200.
Guess what's coming out next week?
201.
Exactly. We'll see you then, Dad. Until then, be a father on purpose. Hey, Dad, guess what? Today's episode does not get produced for free. We have some costs around here, and aside from our amazing sponsors, we have a group of people who help share that burden, and they're called the Fatherhood Guard. For $25 a month, you can join the Fatherhood Guard and be a monthly supporter of our ministry and this podcast. What do you get for that? Well, first, the joy of supporting a ministry like Manhood Journey. Secondly, you help animate things around here. You get cool merch. You get sneak previews. You're part of the insider club at Manhood Journey when you join the Fatherhood Guard. Would you consider doing that? Head over to manhoodjourney.org and you can join today. Secondly, consider sharing this episode with somebody you know. There's a pretty good chance that someone you trust shared this show with you in the past. Now, there are men around you who trust you. It might be your brother-in-law, your friend, your pastor. You know somebody who would benefit from today's episode, who's a dad that needs to be encouraged. Share this show with them today. And remember, as you go, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.